95 years old. Most people that age are somewhere quiet, maybe a garden, maybe a porch, counting blessings and steering clear of drama. But William Shatner? He has never done quiet a day in his life. The man who made Captain Kirk a household name is still talking, still working, and finally, telling the truth about what really went down on the most legendary sci-fi set in television history. Cold shoulders. Sabotaged scenes. A feud so venomous it outlasted the show by 5 decades. A friendship that dissolved into heartbreaking silence. A wife he couldn't save. Tonight, we're beaming straight into the chaos. Welcome aboard. This ride has no warp speed limit. The icon, the legend, the man who never watched his own show. Let's start with the obvious. William Shatner is one of the most recognizable names in entertainment. Literally. The man. The myth. Captain James Tiberius Kirk. The guy who turned a low-budget 1960s sci-fi show about space travel into a cultural religion that billions of people still worship today. Star Trek. The original series ran from 1966 to 1969, and Shatner appeared in every single episode. Not most of them. Every single one. He then went on to voice Kirk in the animated series, starred in the first 7 Star Trek films, and became so embedded in that uniform that, at one point, it was genuinely hard to tell where William Shatner ended and James T. Kirk began. But here's the thing, and this is where it starts getting interesting. The man who built a dynasty out of playing Captain Kirk has never actually sat down and watched the original show. Not most of it, anyway. Which somehow makes the whole legend even stranger. In a 2021 interview with People magazine, Shatner admitted that he has avoided watching himself on screen for most of his career, because, and I quote, he doesn't like the way he looks or what he does. The discomfort of watching himself perform is so real, so painful, that even after 60 years, he can't bring himself to do it. The one Star Trek film he has seen? Star Trek V. The Final Frontier. And you know why? Because he directed it. He had no choice. Now, before you assume this means Shatner was a one-trick pony who peaked in the 60s and rode that wave forever, hold on. Because the man's post-Kirk resume is genuinely staggering. He played the alien boss, yes, the big giant head, on Third Rock from the Sun. He appeared in Miss Congeniality. He wrote a whole series of sci-fi novels called Tech War, which also became a TV series. But the real crown jewel? His role as the utterly unhinged, wildly entertaining Denny Crane in The Practice. And then its spin-off, Boston Legal. That role didn't just get him respect, it won him 2 Emmy Awards. 2. Not nominations. Wins. At an age when most Hollywood veterans are being graciously handed lifetime achievement trophies and shuffled off stage, Shatner was collecting actual hardware. So yes, the legacy is enormous. The talent is undeniable. But here's the thing about enormous legacies. They cast enormous shadows, and not everyone standing in that shadow was happy about it. Which begs the question, if William Shatner was so beloved by audiences, why did some of the people closest to him, the very co-stars he worked alongside every single day, spend decades saying he was an absolute nightmare? Set secrets. The Star Trek cast that was anything but one big happy family. Let's be very clear about something. The world of Star Trek is built on an idea of unity, diversity, a crew of different backgrounds and species working together for the greater good of humanity. It's basically the most wholesome concept television ever produced. And yet, behind that message of togetherness, the on-set reality was reportedly something else entirely. Multiple cast members of the original series have gone on record, in memoirs, interviews, and documentaries, describing a working environment shaped largely by one man's outsized ego. And that man was William Shatner. Nichelle Nichols, who played the iconic Lieutenant Uhura, was candid in interviews about her frustrations on set. She said Shatner had a habit of bossing around directors and even guest stars, and that he treated the show less like a team ensemble and more like his personal vehicle. And it showed in the work. because Shatner allegedly had a very particular habit of requesting rewrites that shifted key dialogue away from other characters and onto himself. He didn't just want the best lines. He wanted all the lines. Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov, admitted on a podcast years later that there was a time when he genuinely resented Shatner for his behavior on set. James Doohan, Scotty, beloved Scotty, had his own issues with Shatner for years, though he eventually softened and the two made peace before Doohan's death in 2005. And then, confirming what everyone had been whispering for years, came Gene Roddenberry himself. The creator of Star Trek, the man who built the entire universe, reportedly wrote a letter to both Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, telling them that between the two of them, they had, in his words, divided up the market on selfishness and egocentricity. Let that sink in. The father of the franchise had to write both his lead stars a letter telling them to stop acting like divas. On a show literally about cooperation and peace. In 1989, when Shatner was directing Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, things hit a new low. He made a deliberate decision to cut a scene in which Sulu, George Takei's character, takes command of the ship. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a budget issue. Takei believed it was pure, calculated sabotage, a move designed to keep the camera exactly where Shatner preferred it, on himself. Doohan, Nichols, Koenig, they all eventually moved on, more or less. Time heals most things. But there was one cast member for whom time changed absolutely nothing. So who was it that carried those wounds the longest, and turned them into a 5-decade public feud that still makes headlines today? The answer, unsurprisingly, would only make the drama worse. The feud that refuses to die, Shatner versus George Takei. George Takei, Hikaru Sulu, helmsman of the USS Enterprise, has been telling anyone who William Shatner would listen since the 1990s that William Shatner is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most difficult human beings he has ever worked with. And Shatner? He has spent the same amount of time insisting that Takei's grudge is baffling, irrational, and, as he once cheerfully suggested, possibly the product of mental illness. Welcome to the most dramatic feud in sci-fi history. Population. 2 men in their 90s, still at it. The origins, according to Takei, go all the way back to the 1960s on set. In his 1994 memoir To the Stars, Takei wrote that Shatner would routinely ignore him between takes, not just on bad days, but as a pattern of behavior. The cold shoulder. The deliberate non-acknowledgement. The kind of petty social cruelty that actors who know exactly how much power they hold tend to exercise over those below them in the pecking order. That resentment simmered for decades. Then came 1989 and the Star Trek V scene cut, which poured accelerant all over it. But the moment that truly turned this into a pop culture spectacle, the moment that gave entertainment journalists everything they needed, came in 2008. In 2008, George Takei married his longtime partner Brad Altman in a joyful, widely covered ceremony. It was a milestone moment, not just personally but historically. And Takei invited the entire original Star Trek cast. Except, he claims, the invitations never made it to Shatner. Or rather, and this is where the stories diverge spectacularly, Shatner claims he was the only cast member deliberately not invited. Shatner, never one to process things privately, uploaded a YouTube video about the situation in which he called the alleged snub a psychosis and suggested, with a kind of barely veiled viciousness that only the truly wounded can muster, that Takei had some serious psychological issues to work through. Takei responded that an invitation had absolutely been sent, and that Shatner simply never responded. 2 stories. 1 feud. 0 resolution. Fans, of course, were left endlessly debating who was telling the truth. By 2015, Takei had officially stopped sugarcoating it. In an interview with the New York Times, he called Shatner an egocentric, self-involved prima donna. Not a dig. Not shade. Full capital letter accusation on the record, in one of the most widely read newspapers on the planet. Shatner fired back, as he always does, saying the only time Takei ever got press was when he was trashing him. He also pointed out, with some exasperation, that all of this appeared to stem from a camera angle dispute that happened more than 50 years ago. A 30-second scene. Half a century of bitterness. Even after Shatner's triumphant 2021 Blue Origin spaceflight, a genuinely historic moment when he became the oldest person ever to reach space, Trekkie couldn't resist. He cracked publicly that Shatner was boldly going where others have gone before, and referred to him as a guinea pig. Shatner, for his part, seemed more amused than wounded. The feud is real. The bitterness is real. But here's the thing, the feud that gets far less tabloid coverage, the one that was quieter and more personal and ultimately far more devastating for Shatner, wasn't with Trekkie at all. So who was the co-star whose silence hurt Shatner the most, and what happened in those final weeks before it was too late to fix it? Before Kirk, the boy from Montreal who stumbled into stardom. Here's something people don't often think about when they picture William Shatner. He was born not in Hollywood, not in New York, not even in the United States. He came into the world on March 22, 1931, in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Montreal, a leafy, mostly English-speaking neighborhood tucked into the heart of Quebec. He was born into a conservative Jewish family, the son of Anne and Joseph Shatner, with two sisters, Joy and Farla. His father worked in the clothing business, the kind of steady, respectable trade that immigrant families built their Canadian dream stories around. And his family was, in many ways, a classic immigrant success story. His grandfather had already made one defining decision before William was even born. He'd changed the family name to sound more English, smoothing over the rough edges of an Eastern European surname in a country that didn't always welcome differences with open arms. Shatner's grandparents had fled from Ukraine and Lithuania, back when those regions were divided between the Russian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, searching for something safer, something more stable. Young William went to Willow Street Elementary School and then West Hill High School, unremarkable in the way most childhoods are unremarkable, until they're not. He found his way to the Montreal Children's Theatre, discovered that performing felt like breathing, and decided to chase it. Not instead of education, alongside it. He enrolled at McGill University and studied economics, graduating in 1952 with a Bachelor of Commerce. So yes, Captain Kirk has a commerce degree. Let that amuse you for a moment. Before he graduated, he was also working as a camp counselor at a B'nai B'rith summer camp. And it's there, in that ordinary summer job, that one of the most quietly beautiful details of his early life emerges. Among the campers was a teenage Holocaust survivor who didn't speak English. Shatner made it his personal mission to help the boy learn the language, spending time with him, patient and kind, in a way that people who later accused him of being impossible to work with might find hard to reconcile. That kind of early empathy doesn't disappear. It gets buried, sometimes, under decades of ego and ambition and celebrity. But it was there. His big theatrical break came in 1956, at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario, where he was understudying Christopher Plummer in Henry V. Here's the moment. Plummer came down with kidney stones. Shatner got 3 hours' notice that he was going on. 3 hours. For a major Shakespearean lead. He went on. He performed. He didn't just survive, he apparently shone so brightly that Plummer himself, one of the greatest stage actors of his generation, later wrote that he knew, watching Shatner that night, that this young man was going to be a star. Shatner's own memory of that night is very different. He has described it as terrifying beyond description, and said he would never ever do anything like it again. That contrast, the natural star who was utterly terrified of the stage, tells you something real about William Shatner.